This story is based on true events. I do not expect you to believe it. Even I wish I could stop believing it. But I was there. July 3rd, 1999. Kerala, India. This photo was taken just outside a rural Catholic mission compound in Kottayam. You can see a few of us in it. Blurry faces, standing near the church gate. That is me in the back, next to Father Sebastian. I am the one holding the small rosary in both hands. My head is slightly turned. Someone took the photo just before the last day. If you had told me then what would happen inside that house, I would have left the same day I was 22. A theology student sent from Mangalore to spend 2 weeks assisting the diocesan outreach. That meant house visits, prayer meetings, helping with food drives. But the compound I was assigned to had a different purpose. That summer, they were hiding something, or rather, they were trying to keep something in. The girl's name was Miriam. She was 14 when I met her. Thin, quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy in a room. She had not spoken in 3 days. Her family said she had been unwell for months. But that was not the truth. They did not bring her to a hospital. They brought her to the church. It was not a normal church. It was a converted schoolhouse, painted pale yellow, set behind a wall of palm trees. No steeple, no altar, just a prayer room, a sleeping room, and a kitchen. It had once been used to train catechists. Now it held her. I was not supposed to go near that side of the compound, but on my second day, I heard something. It was a voice, a girl's voice. Speaking clearly, in Latin, the words echoed through the wall like a chant, but not a sacred one. It was a reversed version of the Kyrie, pitched higher than it should have been. I froze. My skin went cold. There was no liturgy scheduled that day. I turned to Father Sebastian. He saw my expression and simply said, "Stay out of that room." But the next night, I disobeyed. I waited until the others were asleep. The fans buzzed in the dark hallway. The candles had long burned out. I walked quietly, barefoot on the tiled floor. Her door was shut, but the window was cracked. The smell was the first thing I noticed, not like rot, not like illness. It was the sharp, sweet smell of burning flowers and old meat. Inside the room, she sat on the floor. Her eyes were open. Her head was tilted. Her mouth was moving, but there was no sound now. A small bowl of water sat near her feet. Next to it, a crucifix lay on the ground, turned upside down. I could see the edge of something drawn in chalk on the wall. A priest was seated beside her. Holding a Bible, he was not reading it. He was shaking the next morning. I was called in by Father Sebastian. He asked why I had disobeyed. I told him the truth. I heard her voice. I wanted to understand. He said nothing for a while. Then he handed me a tape. It was a small cassette with no label. "Play this in your room," he said. "Then come back and tell me what you heard." That night, I sat alone with the tape recorder. The first 30 seconds were silent. Then there was a gasp, a wet, distorted gasp. Then a voice, not a scream, not a growl, just a whisper, repeating one sentence again and again. "I will not go. I will not go. I will not go." After a full minute, another voice cut through. It was low, calm, it said. "She is already mine." I stopped the tape. I ejected it, placed it in a drawer, and locked it away. When I returned the next morning, Miriam was gone. Her parents said she had fallen. Unconscious during prayer, they carried her to the adjoining building. Only clergy were allowed inside now. I watched from the window as 3 men in white cassocks stood in a triangle around her. One held a crucifix. One read from a thick book in Tamil. The third held a relic, a sliver of wood wrapped in cloth. She was tied down, even from behind the glass. I could see her lips moving, but no sound came out. That night, the wind outside did not stop. The trees shook. The dogs barked until morning. I did not sleep. The door to the girl's room had been sealed with holy oil. I found drops of it on the handle. The next morning, the tape was gone from my drawer. I did not leave. That is what I regret most. I stayed. Even after seeing her eyes, even after the tape, even after the wind. I thought I was being brave. The truth is, I was still trying to prove myself. To God, to my teachers, to Father Sebastian, I thought staying meant I had faith. But faith is not what protects you from things like this. That night, I woke to the sound of metal. It was faint at first, like a spoon dragged across the floor, slow, unhurried. The fan in my room was spinning. The light was off. The sound stopped. Then I heard something else. It was not a voice. It was breathing. Not normal breathing. Fast, too fast. Like someone was hyperventilating just outside my door. I sat up in bed. The window was shut. The air felt thick. The rosary under my pillow was warm. I waited. The breathing stopped. I lay back down, not knowing if I was dreaming. Just before I closed my eyes, the sound came again. One loud bang on the door. Then nothing. I stayed frozen in bed until morning. When I stepped out, the hall was empty. The room where Miriam had been held was now locked from the outside. There were scratch marks on the door. Some fresh, some old. Father Sebastian walked up behind me. He did not ask what I saw. He simply told me to come with him. We went to the back chapel, the one no visitors were allowed in. Inside, 3 men were kneeling. 2 were local priests. The third was unfamiliar. He looked older, from the north, a different dialect. He introduced himself as Father Dominic. He had been called by the bishop. He had handled cases before. He asked if I had heard her voice. I nodded. He asked what I felt when I heard it. I told him it did not feel like a voice at all. He smiled a little. Good, he said. Then you know what we are dealing with. He opened a small wooden box and took out a cloth-wrapped bundle. Inside was a black book. It was not like any Bible I had seen. The pages were yellowed. The text was Latin, handwritten, annotated in ink. He told me it had belonged to a priest who died in Goa in 1936. It had not been used since, until now. Father Dominic did not speak often, but when he did, everyone listened. He told us that Miriam had stopped eating. She had not spoken in 3 days, but at night, her lips moved. The phrases were sometimes Aramaic, sometimes Latin, sometimes words no one recognized. When water was brought to her, it boiled. When crucifixes were placed on her skin, they left burn marks. When asked to recite a prayer, she screamed. He said it was not the girl. The thing inside her knew what we feared. It knew our doubts. It knew our names. I asked what he meant. He said, when you hear your name from her mouth, you must not answer. That night, the first session began. It was not an exorcism yet. Not formally. It was a preparation. I was asked to sit outside the room with a candle if the candle went out. I had to knock 3 times. That was the signal that something had changed in the air. I asked what that meant. Father Dominic said, "The spirits move in pressure, not heat." I sat in the hallway, silent, holding a small clay candle holder. For nearly 20 minutes, nothing happened. Then I felt it. The floor grew cold. The walls too, not like wind, like something pulling the warmth from the building itself. The flame stayed steady, but the wax began to bubble faster than it should have. From behind the door, I heard her voice again. She was laughing, the kind of laugh that has no joy in it. Low, slow, knowing then a different sound, like something heavy falling to the floor. I stood up, knocked once, then twice, then 3 times. The door opened quickly. "Father." Dominic looked at the candle. He nodded and told me to leave the hallway. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the chapel alone. The crucifix above the altar had cracked. No one else mentioned it at dawn. I returned to my room. My bed was covered in dried leaves. I had not left the window open. No trees were near. The leaves were not from this region. Later that day, I found out something else. One of the priests from the previous night had left. He did not pack, did not tell anyone. His room was empty. His Bible was gone. Father Dominic said nothing about it. He only told us that tonight, the real prayers would begin. The prayers began at midnight. Father Dominic said it was the only time the voice slept. We gathered in the chapel room again, 4 of us. 2 priests, 1 assistant, me. Miriam lay in the center on a woven mat. Her wrists were bound gently with prayer cords. Her eyes were closed. For a moment, I thought she looked peaceful, but that was the lie. Her skin had changed, not in color, but in tension. It looked stretched, too smooth in some places, bruised in others. There was a mark on her chest, not a wound, a shape, a perfect circle, like a seal had been pressed against her skin. The room was lit by 7 oil lamps, no bulbs, no windows. Father Dominic opened the black book and began reading. It was not a language I fully understood. Latin, but old, a mix of Eastern dialects. He paused after every verse and whispered the same line, "Lord, keep the walls strong." Then he looked at me. He asked me to join in the responses. I was not ready. I hesitated. Then I said yes. The first few minutes were quiet. Miriam did not move. The only sound was oil cracking in the lamps. Then her foot twitched once. Then, again Father Dominic continued. The twitching turned into a tremble. Her eyes opened, but they were not hers anymore. There was no fear in them, just recognition. She stared at me, right through me. Then she spoke, not in a scream, not in a whisper. She said my name, my full name, twice. No. One had told her who I was. No one had ever said my last name. Near her dot, my throat went dry. I looked away. She said it again, but this time, the voice changed. It lowered. There were 2 tones inside it now. It sounded like 2 people, speaking in sync. Father Dominic slammed the book shut. He sprinkled salt in a circle around her body. The temperature in the room dropped instantly. Miriam began to convulse. She twisted her body in unnatural angles. Her mouth opened wide, too wide. The scream that followed was not human. It had no pitch, no breath, just force. The lamps flickered. The shadows shook. One of the oil Bowls tipped over. The fire caught the edge of the mat. Father Dominic moved fast. He threw his shawl over the flame and stepped between us and the girl. He recited the Pater Noster out loud, faster, louder. Miriam stopped screaming. She fell back, but her eyes stayed open. She was not unconscious. She was watching. Father Dominic instructed me to fetch the small relic box. It was in the adjacent room, behind a locked drawer. I ran, nearly slipped on the tile. When I returned, the air in the chapel was heavy, like incense, but thicker. He opened the box and removed a thin cross carved from what looked like stone. He pressed it to her chest. She did not flinch. Instead, she smiled, and then she spoke again, this time in my mother tongue. She spoke in Konkani. She said a sentence that froze my bones. Do you remember the well? I had never spoken of it, not to anyone. I had nearly drowned in a well when I was 9. It had no relation to the church, to her, to any of this. But she knew. She smiled wider and said, You called out then? No one came. Father Dominic said, Do not answer. But I had already spoken. I said, How do you know that? She replied, Because I was there. She looked at the crucifix in his hand and laughed. It was the first time I saw Father Dominic hesitate. He asked us all to leave. We stepped outside. The night was silent. The trees were still. He stayed inside with her after 20 minutes. The lights went out. We waited in the dark. I heard whispers from inside, not from him, from her. And then one loud thud. The door opened. He walked out slowly. He was sweating. His hands were trembling. He told us we would continue the next night, but he did not sleep. I saw him sitting under the statue outside, lips moving in silent prayer. In the morning, the mark on Miriam's chest was gone, but a new one had appeared, behind her ear this time. It was a symbol none of us recognized. We took a photo of it. We sent it to the archdiocese. The reply came the next evening. The symbol matched a manuscript found in a sealed temple crypt in Syria. It had not been decoded. No one knew what it meant, but Father Dominic already understood. He told us, It is not possession. It is invitation. The girl had not been taken. She had called it. We moved her to the prayer room that night. It was the only space with a full concrete floor and iron-bolted doors. They brought in new ropes, blessed salt, holy oil, and 2 relics. One was a shard of bone in a sealed case. The other, a piece of old cloth soaked in chrism oil. Father Dominic asked us not to speak her name. From now on, she was to be referred to only as the child. He said names give it power. I asked him what we were really facing. He told me not to ask questions I was not ready to answer. That was the last normal sentence he spoke to me. The rest of that night was nothing like the others. At exactly midnight, the lights in the compound cut out. We were using battery lamps. The chapel room had none. I held one lamp. Father Dominic held the relic. The girl sat quietly, but her hands were trembling. So were her eyelids. We began the rite. It was longer this time, structured. He read in Latin. The others responded in Tamil. The child did not move for nearly 10 minutes. Then she whispered a phrase I cannot forget. You have brought them into the fire. Her voice did not echo, but it carried. Each syllable felt like it passed through our ears directly. into the base of the spine. She smiled again. Then she raised her head and screamed. Her body arched off the floor. The ropes snapped. Not one of them frayed. They snapped like paper. We stepped back. Father Dominic raised the relic and pressed it against her shoulder. She howled. Not in pain. In fury, the oil from the cloth burned her skin. She backed away from it, crawling on hands and feet like an animal. I stepped in front of the door. She looked at me, and then she spoke again. This time, the voice was different. It was my mother's voice. She said, "Marcus, come help me." That was not possible. My mother was alive, hundreds of miles away. The voice mimicked her tone perfectly. She even used the same words she used to say when I was a boy. "Come, carry the bucket for me." I froze. "Father." Dominic yelled not to listen, but the voice kept changing. It went from my mother's to a teacher I once had, then to a childhood friend who died in a car crash. Each voice perfect, each one reaching into a memory I had not opened in years. The child walked toward me, her body shaking. Her eyes rolled back. The lamps flickered again. One of the priests tried to grab her arm. She turned her head and whispered something into his ear. He fell to the ground, not fainted, not shocked. He screamed. His scream was pure terror, the kind that tears your throat. He scrambled backward on all fours and ran out the door, leaving his Bible behind. We never saw him again. Father Dominic recited a blessing over the open doorway and closed it. He told us it had started. I asked what he meant. He said, "The entity is no longer tied to her. Now it knows who we are." We stayed the rest of the night in the chapel. No one spoke. The girl sat in the center again, but now her hands were tied with chain. Not rope. She didn't struggle. She hummed a low lullaby, the kind grandmothers sing in rural villages, except it had no words, just the tune, over and over again. I could not sleep. At dawn she collapsed. Her breathing slowed. Her lips turned dry. We gave her water. She did not drink it, but when the water touched her lips, the chain on her wrist sparked. Father Dominic said this had happened before. I asked where. He said, "In Belgium, in a town no longer listed on maps." That day, the bishop sent a letter. He had approved the final rite, an exorcism, but we had only one day to prepare. The girl's family had been contacted. They refused to take her back. The house was ready. The priest who had screamed had not returned. We found his room empty, his clothes gone, his cross left behind. That afternoon, I went to fetch candles. When I returned, I heard murmuring from the girl's room. No one was inside. She was speaking again, but the language was not known. It was not Latin, not Tamil, not Aramaic. The recording device in the chapel picked it up. When we played it back later, the voice was not hers. It was male, deep, choppy. The tape warped when it hit certain words. Father Dominic told me something that chilled me. He said, "These voices are not speaking to us. They are speaking to each other." The exorcism began at dusk. We gathered in the lower chamber. It had once been used as a storeroom. Now it held nothing but a cot, a crucifix, and 2 metal chairs. The girl lay on the cot. Her arms were bound again, this time not with rope or chain, but with linen cloth soaked in oil and prayer ash. Her face was pale, lips cracked, fingers clenched into her palms. She was silent, not sleeping, watching. We lit 14 candles, placed them in a circle. Father Dominic stood at the center with a bell. He rang it 3 times. Then we began the rite of deliverance. The words were old. He did not read them. He spoke them from memory. I stood behind him. My hands trembled, not from fear, from cold. The temperature in that room had dropped 10 degrees in under a minute. The floor was damp. The candles flickered without wind. Then she opened her mouth. She did not scream. She sang the same lullaby from before, but this time in reverse. It sounded like a lullaby being unwound, like time folding back on itself. Father Dominic raised the relic and began the Latin verse. He called on Saint Michael, Saint Cyprian, Saint Benedict. He anointed her forehead. Her body bucked. One hand came free. She did not use it to fight. She reached for his robe. Her fingers touched the cloth. He dropped the relic. The sound it made was like metal on stone. She screamed, so did he. It was not pain, it was something deeper. The sound made my ears ring, my nose bled. I dropped to my knees. The candlelight bent inward. It bent toward her body. The flames turned blue. She lifted her head, looked at me, and said a sentence that I still hear when I try to sleep. You opened the door. She was right. I had been the one to say, yes, I had stood outside with the candle. I had agreed to help, I thought. I was protecting her, but something else had been waiting for a vessel, and I had been the one to let it in. Father Dominic took a deep breath. Then he began to pray louder. He commanded the entity to leave. He called it by a name I had never heard. Not a demon name, a title, the judge. She stopped moving. Then she opened her mouth again, and she spoke in 3 voices at once. 1 male, 1 female, 1 child, the same sentence, repeated, this is my court, this is my court, this is my court. The crucifix on the wall cracked. Water began to drip from the ceiling, except it was not water, it was black, thick. Father Dominic threw salt in a circle. She screamed again. Her body convulsed. She began to rise off the cot. No wires, no tricks. She levitated nearly a foot. The candles went out. The room plunged into darkness, except for the center. She glowed, not with light, with heat. Her skin began to steam. Father Dominic placed the crucifix directly over her heart. He shouted the final lines of the rite. I do not remember all the words, but the last line struck me. You do not belong to this earth. She stopped, glowing. Her body dropped. The impact shook the floor. The candles relit on their own. She lay still, her mouth closed, her hands relaxed. Father Dominic checked her pulse. He nodded. She was breathing. For the first time in hours, the silence that followed was heavier than the noise. He asked us to leave him alone with her. We waited outside. No one spoke, not even a whisper. 20 minutes passed. Then he opened the door. His face was pale. He said only one thing. It is done. She slept for 2 days. When she woke, she did not remember us, not our names, not the room, not the days before. But she did remember the lullaby. She hummed it once before falling back asleep. Father Dominic did not rest. He packed that night and left before sunrise. He left a note behind. It read, "There is always a price." 3 days later, we received news. The priest who had fled earlier had been found. He had wandered into a field, speaking to himself. He was being cared for by a distant mission. He did not recognize anyone. He had forgotten his name. Father Sebastian called for silence on the matter. No one was to speak of what happened outside the seminary walls. The girl was returned to her family. They were told she had suffered a fever. She never spoke of what happened again, but once. Years later, I visited her town. She worked at a small clinic. She was calm, smiling. As I walked past her, she paused. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw recognition. She said nothing, but in her hand, she held a rosary. Not one I had seen before. The beads were dark, red dot almost black, and the cross at the bottom was missing. I did not speak to her. I simply nodded and left. Father Dominic was never seen again. His name was removed from the registry. His room was cleared, his relic box sealed. I still have the audio tape, the one that recorded her voice that night. I have played it twice since then. Once to remind myself that it was real, and once, by accident. I have not slept well since. This is not a story I tell often, but I had to write it because I have seen what faith can do and what fear becomes when it wears a familiar face.